Her children pledge each faithful hour to guard Guyana's lands, to fall the shock of rude invader who'd violate ours, to cherish and defend forever the state that gave them birth. A powerful song, Mr. Speaker, a song that reminds us every day of our duty towards this nation, our duty as Guyanese to foil the shock of rude invader who'd violate her earth, to cherish and defend forever the state that gave them birth. I rise today, Mr. Speaker, to express my unequivocal support for this motion before this honorable House at this extraordinary sitting. Mr. Speaker, we are in extraordinary times. We look the world over and we see that which was once sacrosanct is now temporal. That which we held as time-honored principle and now discarded in the name of the expedient. Here at home, we are all facing what we agree is an existential threat. A threat to our territorial integrity, a threat to our sovereignty, a threat to our very way of life. A nation of over 28 million, Mr. Speaker, with a large, well-equipped army, and a population indoctrinated in the belief, in the misguided, the mistaken, and the unfounded belief that the Essequibo belongs to them. Venezuela is, for all intents and purposes, a formidable Goliath. Our beloved Guyana, on the other hand, Mr. Speaker, is a young state with a peace-loving population of less than 1 million people, a small defense force, and we are a nation on the cusp of achieving our full potential. My colleague on the other side of the House laid out for us in great detail the historical developments that have led us to this time, and I thank him for it, and I will not, in the interest of time, regurgitate those developments. I will only observe here, Mr. Speaker, that the tensions between our nation and Venezuela have undoubtedly escalated to levels hitherto unseen. The Maduro government's claim over 3/4 of our territory, including our Essequibo, have cast a long shadow over our sovereignty, as it has from the time we became a sovereign nation. Their actions have impeded our economic development, and has done this for far too long. And now we're faced with a referendum that has serious implications for our territorial integrity, and that poses threat of irreparable harm to our nation. Mr. Speaker, Guyanese both at home and abroad are uneasy and deeply concerned by what they see as a grave gathering danger. Tens of thousands of Venezuelans are here, we know this, and hundreds more arrive every day through our porous borders. It is not a matter of argument, Mr. Speaker, that these vast numbers pose a significant threat to the socio-economic fabric of this nation, placing strain on already inadequate health and education and security systems. Some have argued, and correctly so, that this uncontrolled migration represents a threat to our national security. And I want to say, Mr. Speaker, that we in this House represent the people of Guyana. And it would be irresponsible of us to come to this House and not to address the concerns of the ordinary Guyanese man, woman, and child. Mr. Speaker, it is not inconceivable, and history has examples, that A collapse of our public sector system could occur just under the sheer weight of numbers, Mr. Speaker. And Guyanese are undoubtedly anxious. Everywhere we go, in the towns, in the villages, as MPs on this side of the House, I can't speak for the experience of my colleagues on the other side, but on this side we are asked, MP, what is it? What are we doing? How are we dealing with this? Guyanese are anxious. Mr. Speaker, the truth is, and the reality of the Guyanese man and woman in the street is that they see these migrants as competing for jobs, for businesses, for land ownership, even for personal relationships, Mr. Speaker. Those are the concerns of the ordinary Guyanese man and woman. Mr. Speaker, we want to say, and we've been very clear, and we speak to every Guyanese that we would meet, that we understand your anxiety, but notwithstanding your anxiety, we as Guyanese, Guyana as a sovereign state has certain international obligations, and we are required by those treaties to which we subscribe to treat those who are in our midst with the utmost level of dignity and regard for human rights. But it would be irresponsible of us not to acknowledge that the concern exists. We would be shirking our duties as members of this National Assembly not to represent the interests of the people who elected us to be here. Mr. Speaker, we want to make it clear that we must treat, as I said, migrants with the dignity and respect that one human being deserves from another. We must treat them as guests, not as threats. Mr. Speaker, but I want to be very clear, very clear about something, that even guests are expected to obey the rules of the House. Mr. Speaker, we want to be clear on this side of the House that peaceful, law-abiding migrants will be accorded the Guyanese hospitality and the full protection of our laws, as we are required to do. We want to make that very, very clear. We are here, Mr. Speaker, and we have been reminding Guyanese, because we will not operate as if we are ostriches with our proverbial heads in the sand. We see the anxiety of the Guyanese people. We see the videos on social media that is giving rise to more anxiety. But we want to say, and we are at pains to remind Guyanese, that even if they are provoked, they are not to take the law into their own hands. They must turn offenders over to the authorities immediately. Mr. Speaker, in the existing circumstances, we want to be clear that Venezuelan migrants, bar those, of course, who are entitled to citizenship by virtue and hospitality is just that, accommodation and hospitality, and it must not be regarded as a path to citizenship unless you are entitled to it, or as permanent residency, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, what I am speaking about here is embodied in the laws of so many countries, Mr. Speaker, and if we research, we will see that this is nothing new and novel. But this is what a nation does to protect its people, Mr. Speaker. Our first duty is to the people of Guyana, is to Guyanese, and we will not shirk in our duty. Mr. Speaker, I want to be very clear, because again, we as representatives of the people, we do not sit in this National Assembly of our own free will and volition. We were elected to represent the interests of Guyanese people. And that is what I stand here today intent on doing. And so I hope, Mr. Speaker, that we've been very, very clear that we will not encourage the mistreatment of any migrant. We will not encourage Guyanese taking the law into their own hands. And I repeat that for emphasis because I know that there are those who are interested in propaganda and in cheap political points. We are not here for that today. We are here to represent the interests of the people of Guyana. Mr. Speaker, I want to say that it is important that we understand, as we have been calling on this side of the House, that the time is now for a national conversation on migration. We called for it 2 years ago. We warned about these numbers 2 years ago. I stood right in this spot in the National Assembly 2 years ago, and we said that unless we have serious conversations and unless we took serious action, we would find ourselves in the position that we find ourselves in today. And we are living to see that exactly what we warned about has come to pass, much to the detriment and anxiety of Guyanese. Mr. Speaker, it is all around. It is all around us. When you look at the legal frameworks that exist to protect Guyanese, to protect the citizens of a sovereign state, and to make sure that the path for citizenship is crystal clear, that the path for residency is crystal clear. Mr. Speaker, now is the time for us to have those conversations. We are a small nation of 800,000 thereabouts, if we are to believe the last set of statistics. And Mr. Speaker, we owe it to our people. We owe it to our people to have a very clear legal framework. A framework that does not extend to fiat or rule by fiat, but that is clearly deliberated in this House so that people who come to our nation will know exactly where they stand and how they stand and what is their path to citizenship, if any, Mr. Speaker. I repeat, our first duty is to the people of Guyana, and we must be unapologetic in the prosecution of that duty, Mr. Speaker. We are unapologetic about putting Guyana first. And so, like I said, Mr. Speaker, we have a migration situation. We have a situation of thousands of persons pouring over our border. We have a situation where there are persons who are entitled by virtue of their parentage to be given Guyanese citizenship. And we want to make it clear that we on this side of the House understand that. Mr. Speaker, like I said, a perusal of citizenship laws around the world sets out a very clear path. And so I am wondering whether it is time that we propose legislative measures to make it clear, and particularly in the context of a nation of 28 million people, where the youngest child is taught from the time that he or she could read that Essequibo somehow belongs to them. Mr. Speaker, these are extraordinary times, and we cannot behave as if it is business as usual, because it is not business as usual, Mr. Speaker. And so for us to consider whether, Mr. Speaker, that we should have specific laws to deal with this issue. We must consider whether, given the fact of this territorial claim, given the fact of this belief that Essequibo belongs to them, whether we must not enshrine in our laws provisions that speak to persons being, and particularly migrants, and particularly people who are coming in from the neighboring western neighbor, that we would say whether there is merit in considering laws that make it clear that participation in inappropriate political activities that amount to insurrection, treason, or promoting cessation or annexation will be met firmly by prosecution, deportation, and possibly a ban on residencies. Mr. Speaker, let us not forget, we had a Rupununi uprising, and we must, unless we fail to learn from our history, be doomed to repeat those mistakes. There is too much at stake now, Mr. Speaker, for us not to learn from our history and to proceed blindly along. Mr. Speaker, there will be dual citizens, and dual citizens must choose their loyalty. And they have a right to choose whichever loyalty they will exercise. If they choose to be Venezuelans, as they have a right to so do, then we must consider whether it will be important to proscribe their ability to act and participate in Guyanese civic and political activities. And Mr. Speaker, let me be very clear about this. This might not have been critical had we not been dealing with people who genuinely believe, because we interact with people. We interact with people in our community and we get feedback, and there is a genuine belief, as represented the other day by the map of Venezuela on that food cart that included the Essequibo in central Georgetown, that we had to send the police to make sure that that was done away with. That is the gravity of what we are dealing with, so forgive me if I'm not prepared to engage in too many pleasantries about this. We have to be serious. There is a Goliath at the gate, and we have to, like David, gather our stones. Mr. Speaker, we must immediately enhance screening procedures at our borders. We must set about to verify and record in a transparent and credible manner those Venezuelan nationals, like I said, who are legitimately entitled to citizenship by virtue of their parentage, those who are eligible as economic migrants, and those who may, given the international legal framework, be eligible for refugee status, and even those who will be deported back to Venezuela because they pose a security threat. This is what the screening process at our borders should be doing. Mr. Speaker, we must establish a robust, continuous education program, one which matches the fervor and intensity that we see next door. As I speak, there are jingles out on social media, whole national songs from Venezuela claiming that Essequibo is theirs, as we sit in this house and as we debate this motion. And so, Mr. Speaker, we must establish a robust, continuous education program which will engender patriotism and respect for our collective heritage. We must have a program, Mr. Speaker, which will inform the youngest to the oldest about the seriousness of the territorial issue. They must know about Venezuela's scandalous and illegitimate claim to our Essequibo. The program, Mr. Speaker, must be tailored to specific audiences, and it must include our 9 indigenous nations in their language. The urgency of the situation demands that no effort be spared to light the fire of patriotism in the belly of every Guyanese man, woman, and child, Mr. Speaker. The urgency is that great, Mr. Speaker. We must have a program that embodies the fundamental and inherent truth that we will repeatedly teach our children and our new adult citizens that Essequibo, as one of the 3 counties of Guyana, is, was, and always will be 100% Guyanese. From Pacaraima, Mr. Speaker, to Parica, from the sprawling savannah, sir, to the rapids at Rockstone, Essequibo belongs to Guyana. Mr. Speaker, now more than ever, we must be committed to full collaboration between the government and all national stakeholders. I want to be clear, the time for petty partisan politics is over. The time for subordinating the national interest below the interests of party and political expediency is over. This moment demands that we, Mr. Speaker, it demands that we rise above this. You know, Mr. Speaker, they're defining moments in a nation's history. These are moments, sir, that shape the course of our collective destiny. The pivotal junctures that we meet, particularly these pivotal junctures, are very often the crucibles in which the character and resilience of a nation are tested. These defining moments, however, are not solely challenges, Mr. Speaker. They are opportunities. They are opportunities for us to learn, to grow, to redefine ourselves. They are opportunities to make positive changes and progress as a nation. It is during these moments, Mr. Speaker, that we have a choice. That we could either set a new course, one that aligns with our values and our aspirations, or we could go down the same road that we have been going down. Mr. Speaker, I'm reminded of the words of J.W. Chinnapen as was set to song by the late Valerie Rodway, which we now know as the national song, Arise Guyana. And it reminds us that when freedom waved her banner bright, on iron Ghana's verdant height, a nation's glad triumphant song, reverberant rose full, loud and long. Guyana, fair Guyana, be true to your higher destiny. Mr. Speaker, inherent in that is an admonition that there is a lower destiny that we must avoid, a lower destiny that we must shun. Mr. Speaker, we are true to a lower destiny when we settle for less, when we use the path of least resistance, when we decide that we are entitled to far less than we are as a nation. Mr. Speaker, a nation embracing its lower destiny manifests itself in a myriad of ways, from failing to take care of the poor and needy, to tolerating injustice and inequity, to fomenting hate and strife for political gain, to failing to invest in our human capital. As Guyanese, Mr. Speaker, we must now more than ever forcefully reject any attempt to be led down such a path. And we must commit ourselves to strive for excellence, embrace our potential, and collectively work towards a higher destiny for ourselves, for our community, and for our nation. And you may ask, Mr. Speaker, why is this important? It is important, sir, because it is only as a united Guyana that we will stand a chance of defeating this Goliath. Mr. Speaker, that is why we on this side of the House have been clear that there will be no daylight between us and the government as it comes and as it relates to the independence of Guyana, to our territorial integrity, and to our sovereignty. Mr. Speaker, we want to be pellucid, and we'll continue to be pellucid. Mr. Speaker, the only way that we will be able to overcome this is to unite. And Mr. Speaker, it must be unity not just in word, but it must be unity in thought. It must be unity in deed. It must be a unity that says, I am my brother's keeper. It must be a unity that says that when one Guyanese suffers, the entire Guyana feels it. It is a unity that will say that we must now put an end to discrimination, to strife, to discord. Because, Mr. Speaker, unity, we speak of it, but we have to walk it out now as a nation. And this is the moment that we have to demonstrate to the world that we are able, we are capable, and we are up to the challenge of uniting for the good of Guyana and for Guyanese. It is true, Mr. Speaker, that how we meet this moment will determine our legacy, and it will determine our place in this world and our place in history. Let us remember in this moment that unity, resilience, adaptability are our greatest assets in confronting the challenges and seizing the opportunities that will come our way. As we face the defining moment of our time, let us be a nation that rises to the occasion. Let us be a nation that demonstrates strength of character and depth of will and depth of unity. Mr. Speaker, we may not have might on our side, but we have right on our side. Mr. Speaker, we have the rule of law on our side. We have the support of the international community on our side. And therefore, the urgency of the moment, sir, demands that we send a clear and ambiguous message that all of Guyana is united in the fundamental premise that the Essequibo, which is the heartland, is 100% Guyanese. It is ours. It is not up for debate. It is not up for debate. It is not up for Barbados-type negotiations. We are confident, sir, in the merits of our case, and we expect to prevail. We reaffirm the full, perfect, and final settlement that was established and embodied in the 1899 award. We reaffirm, Mr. Speaker, the territorial integrity and the sovereignty of this dear land of Guyana, Mr. Speaker. We reaffirm the principles and tenets, sir, which in the interest of time I will not delve into, to support in this motion to support the government and people of the Cooperative Republic of Guyana. We stand strong, Mr. Speaker. And I want to end by saying this, sir. We know we will win. We know we will win. Because, as the famous Bob Marley said, we are confident in the victory of good over evil. And therefore, Mr. Speaker, even though we are hemmed in on every side, even though foes may encamp around us, Mr. Speaker, we want to say to the miner at Monkey Mountain who may be worried about his claim, we want to say to that homemaker in Hampton Court that may be worried about the future of her children. We want to say to the farmer at Fairfield that this land has been in his family for generations and he now wonders what is the implication of this for me, and he's anxious. We say, Mr. Speaker, to the children at Chenapau, we say to Guyanese across these 83,000 square miles, do not fear. Do not fear. We are confident in the victory of good over evil and standing together as one people in this one nation with one destiny. We shall prevail. We shall emerge stronger. We shall emerge better. Long live, Mr. Speaker, the people of the Cooperative Republic of Guyana. Long live, Mr. Speaker, the Cooperative Republic of Guyana.